Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with the Choose the Year book tag. This was originally created by Mel's Bookland Adventure, and I will link her original video down below. I was not tagged by anyone, but I have seen this floating around, and it seemed really cool, so I wanted to do it. The general concept of this tag is that you choose a year, any year, and you go to the Goodreads top 200 books of that year, the most popular books of the year, or any list, and essentially go through and answer these questions based on those books. I will link the list that I used down below, and through that you can easily find the list for any other year. Question 1 is choose the year and why. I chose 1993 because it was the year I was born, and I knew for a fact that there were several books I'd read on this list, so it made it kind of easier. Question 2 is which books from that year have you read? And there were 8 books. I only did the top 100 just because I did find 8 in the top 100, and I kind of just decided that was enough. So I have a couple of them here, and then the couple I will insert pictures. The first is The Giver by Lois Lowry. This is very popular, very well known. It was very high on the list. It's a middle grade dystopian about a world without color. I love it. I've read it a few times. I just reread it the other year, and I have like a whole review video on that series, which I will link down below. But I really love The Giver. I think it's a beautiful story. Then we have The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, which I actually just reread back in March, I think it was. And I gave this book 4 stars, same with The Giver. I really do enjoy this. It's set in the 70s, I believe, told from the perspective of the neighborhood boys about a family of 5 girls who all wind up committing suicide, which is why it's called The Virgin Suicides. I really love the writing style in this. I think it's beautiful. I'm not sure how much I love the way it's told, the perspective. It does seem at points kind of sexist. I talked more about that in my March Rereadathon Reflections video if you're interested, but yeah, I really love this book as well. Then there's Stellaluna by Janell, which is a children's picture book. I could not find my copy, although I know for a fact that I owned one because I read it a lot, but I love this book. I don't remember much about it apart from the fact that it was about a bat named Stellaluna who was either searching for his mother or his mother had died or something along those lines. It had some involvement with the mother in the book, and I don't know. I remember really liking it because I like bats. Bats were really cute, and they were cutely drawn in the book. But yeah, apart from that, I don't really remember much about it. Next on the list was Tamora When the Warmth Began by John Marsden. I don't think I'd realized this book was so old. Like, not that 93 is necessarily old for a book, but I think that when I started reading these, I thought they were like early 2000s books. They read like early 2000s YA. They're Australian young adult kind of dystopian books about a country who invades Australia and essentially like World War III breaks out, but the rest of the world just kind of looks on like, oh, Australia's got to figure this out on their own. And it's about like a group of kids. It's a whole series that I want to read. I gotta buy all the books because the library doesn't have them, which is why I haven't read them. I don't actually remember liking this book very much. I think I gave it 2 stars, but it had an interesting premise, and I kind of wanted to see where the overall arc of the story went. But yeah, I was surprised that this book was published way back in 93, because if I'd heard this book was 2003, that would have surprised me less. But yeah, interesting concept. Next is Harvesting the Heart by Jodi Picoult, which I don't remember anything about, but I know for a fact that I've read this book. Could not tell you who the characters are or what the premise is, but I did go through and like read all of Jodi Picoult's old books when I was in high school, so I know I've read it. I remember that I've read it. If I looked it up, I could probably remember a lot more, but yeah, like just off the top of my head, no, I don't remember. Then we have Wolfspeaker by Tamora Pierce. This is the second book in the Immortals quartet. I actually just reread this book this year as well. It's one of my childhood favorites. Not this book in particular, but the series on a whole, the Immortals quartet. I love it. I love Tamora Pierce as a writer, so I don't know why it surprised me that this book was on the list, because I knew that these came out in the early 90s. I do have my Rereadathon Reflections video for the other month of these, which I will link down below if you want to hear me talk more in depth about these books. But yeah, I really love it. It's a worthwhile series. And then the last 2 books on this list are The Night at Dawn and Mummies in the Morning, which are the Magic Treehouse books 2 and 3 by Mary Pope Osborne. Book 1 was not on this list. I assume it was published in maybe 1992, but the first 2 books are on here, and I looked for them, and they were high up on a shelf that I couldn't reach, so I cannot show you them. But I read loads of these when I was a kid. They were my brother's favorite in particular. Like, he read so many. He has shelves and shelves of these books, and they're like really tiny books. but the Magic Treehouse books were fun. Like, they were a fun way to learn a little bit of history and like a little bit too fantastical for me because I liked a little bit more realism almost, and like the time travel stuff was kind of weird. I've never been very into time travel, but they were fun books. Like, as a kid, they were great. So those are the 8 that I've read. Question number 3 is, are there any books published in that year that sound interesting and would you read them now? I do have 5 books from that year that are on my TBR or like quasi on my TBR that like I'd consider reading them. The first is Along Came a Spider by James Patterson, which is the first in the Alex Cross books. I was always kind of tempted by those books. Like, I've never read James Patterson. I do have like a book of his on my shelf just because I feel like at one point I should try James Patterson just to read it. But the Alex Cross series was like very popular when I was a kid. Like, that was when the first one came out, but they kept coming out for a number of years. So I do remember a lot about them, and I was just always kind of vaguely curious, but I think I was a little bit too young for them. So that one is a maybe. It's not really on my TBR, but like if I saw it in a thrift store, I might pick it up. And then we have Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen, which it's definitely on my TBR. I've watched the movie. I like the movie kind of like in an intrigued kind of way. It's not a favorite of mine, but it is kind of interesting, so I'd be down to read the book. And that is one that I have planned to pick up, and it's just like not really a priority. It's a memoir about a girl who winds up in a psychiatric hospital for a while. She's committed for a number of weeks or months, I think. She has borderline personality disorder, I believe. That's what she's diagnosed with, and it's an interesting movie. The movie has some flaws, but I'd be kind of curious how the book differs. Then Trainspotting by Irvine Welsh, which I know nothing about except the fact that I should both read it and watch the movie because I've done neither, and everyone always talks about it and they're like, yeah, it's amazing, it's like life-changing, whatever. I do want to read it at some point. Like, it's not a priority, but like it's on the list. The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski, which is the first in the Witcher books, which I definitely want to read. My boyfriend actually owns this book. I think it's the collection of short stories, perhaps, but I definitely want to read it. It sounds really interesting, and I watched my boyfriend play The Witcher 3, like, not all the way through, but I watched most of it, and it was an interesting storyline, and I'm definitely curious about how the books differ and like picking it up, and my boyfriend really wants me to read the book so I can like tell him what the differences were or if the books were like really amazing. But like at some point I really do want to. It's just that my library, again, does not actually own any of these books, so I have to buy them all for myself, and I have not done that yet. And then the final book on this list that I would possibly, probably, maybe have on my TBR is Shipping News by Annie Proulx. I have not really heard much about this book, but I do remember Shannon Riddler read it a few months ago, I think, and she talked about it a lot, and it sounded really interesting. I don't remember why it sounded interesting, just that it did, so I put it on my TBR. And question 4 is the most obscure sounding book on the list, and I had to say Freak the Mighty by Rodman Philbrick. Just because it sounded odd. Like, there were many books on this list that I hadn't heard of, obviously, but I think that was the most odd sounding, so I decided to choose that as most obscure. And then 5 is the Strangest book cover, which I will insert over here, but it is Calling on Dragons by Patricia C. Reed. And yeah, I don't know, it just looked weird. I don't think I've ever seen a cover exactly like it, although it does kind of look like an early 90s, late 80s fantasy cover, so there's that. So those were all the questions. I did ramble on for a little bit about the books, but this is kind of an interesting tag. If you're interested, let me know if you'd like me to do other years, because I kind of just picked 93 since it was the year I was born. But I don't know, I'd be kind of interested in trying to do other years with this tag, because it is interesting to look at like a random list and just pull out books and talk about them. But I don't know if that's just interesting to me or if other people would enjoy that as well. A lot of people have done this, but I'm going to tag Cats and Camera, Jamie Reads, and I Read Past My Bedtime. So I will link all their channels down below. They're all quite fabulous. And feel free to do it yourself if you weren't tagged, because I was not tagged either. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.